just making sure I have everything in line here. You're giving the usual eulogy here, and whenever you're done with that, I guess what my cue would be to start is there.
Yeah. I'll look over. Yeah,
That's fine. Yeah. That's all I need.
okay.
Just give me a little cue.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Yeah, that should be great. Okay, wonderful. And the same thing for the closing words, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Sweet. Well, and then so we're getting started at 2 p.m. Should I just start? 2?
Start my next. Like 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Sweet. Sounds
Okay.
good.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to this celebration of life, this honoring of Elise de Papp. I'm the Reverend Sherry Halliday-Kwan, the lead minister here at First Unitarian Church of Rochester, and this is the place that Elise found a spiritual home toward the end of her life, a place where her curiosity could be fed, where her questions were honored and celebrated. On behalf of Elise's children, I want to thank you all for being here today. And I know that there are many who traveled and many who would have liked to have been here but could not. We hold in love all who are present with us in spirit. We gather to honor this life, knowing that death is one of the few things that the human experience has in store for all of us. And still, this precious time between birth and death, well, it's unique to every person. Each of us weaves a pattern all our own. And so we come together today quite simply to tell stories, to tell not all, many of the stories that will blend together to tell about this extraordinary woman's life. As is the tradition of Unitarian Universalism, we begin our time together by lighting a chalice and candles. We begin our time through intentional act. We mark this space as sacred, a space made holy by our attention, a time hallowed by the offering of our lives poured out for one another in listening. So I'd like to invite Elise's grandchildren forward to light our chalice and the 3 candles here on the altar. May the light that we now kindle remind us that life is a gift for which we are grateful, and we gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this gift. May the warmth of the flame and the fire in our hearts carve out space for us all. Thank you. We open our time of remembrance with a reading from the book of Ecclesiastes. There's a time for everything. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. In preparation for the gifts of music and the many words that will pour out for us this afternoon, I invite you into a time of silence, a moment to center ourselves and to prepare for listening. We begin our stories with an arc that I will offer that contains only the barest of details, a framework upon which to hang the stories that others will share today, rich and colorful as they are, rich and colorful as Elise was, in her wit, her personality, her big, expansive love for the world. Elise was born in New Jersey, in South Orange, in 1933. Her father was on the Supreme Court of New Jersey, and her mother, too, was strong, like she was. With 4 older brothers, Elise was the youngest and the only daughter, the only young woman, the only girl. And this preparation would prove needed for what would follow. After graduating from first the Beard School and then Sweetbriar College, she attended the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry. In 1960, she graduated in a class of 70. She was one of 2 women. She was a pioneer throughout her life, and shortly after, in her first decade of practicing medicine, she became the first woman to have a full-time faculty position as a pathologist. She was an esteemed surgical pathologist and cytopathologist, and her career spanned 4 decades. She married a medical school classmate, and together they had 3 children, Anne, John, and Erica, and we'll hear from each of them later. She later worked at Genesee Hospital, and throughout her career, she was trusted both as a clinician and as a colleague. She cared deeply about her work and the people that she did it with, cared deeply about patients, but also staff, and she was a mentor, a teacher, and a friend to many. She worked across disciplines, helping to raise up others to be their best, strongest, and most fully skilled selves. Not always in the most gentlest of ways, but with a deep love that rooted beyond the moment. This love that was big, it went beyond her professional work into her activism and advocacy that she moved into, especially as she retired. Throughout her life, she cared deeply for women's rights for obvious reasons, rights that she was a direct beneficiary of and a fighter for throughout her life. And she carried her work of healing into death. Compassion and choices, and the work that she did to guarantee that people could live well in this country but die well also, was a part of the wholeness and massive intellect and big heart she brought to her work. Toward the end of her life, she became a fierce advocate for hearing loss. And indeed, in preparing for our service today, I went back to my correspondence and found that the last time we talked, she had some opinions about the captioning at church. It could be improved, and she was right. And she was right, and we got better for it here. Forever curious, she traveled extensively after her retirement. She visited every continent. She traveled with her daughter Erica, but she traveled too alone and then not alone, joining tour groups and making friends. She brought that learning back, that love of the world. And she continued teaching and learning throughout her life, leading classes on topics as varied as the Crusades, the Ottoman Empire, and notably the role of the horse in civilization. Of course, people, her family, patients, mentees, colleagues, those were not the only creatures that she cared for. She was an animal lover throughout her life, from rodents to reptiles to her beloved horses and dogs. Elise cared for all of creation. As a healer and a provider, yes, but as a spiritual companion. And so I close with a little bit about the role of the horse in religion. And for those who are new to Unitarian Universalism, you will know what Elise was delighted to discover, that we don't draw from one sacred text or perspective, but believe ourselves to be better, richer, and more grounded by a variety of perspectives, including those we don't agree with. Horses have been spiritual companions to people for time immemorial. Here in this space, the horses are a spiritual token of freedom. Japanese culture considers the horse to be a gentle animal. Though rode in war, this divine creature was, quite frankly, too good for humanity. In China, the horse has a dignified and important role, one that precedes that of all of us, carrying the Buddhist sutras for the first time to people. Throughout many cultures, the spiritual meaning of horses carries courage, integrity, perseverance, and power, all things that Elise carried also. But horses are complicated, deep. And as Elise knew later in her life, when she was convincing both her doctors and perfect strangers to let her ride, horses were both gentle and sweet and instruments of healing, and also something one could fall off of. In Christianity, the horse most often appears as a symbol of death, a companion even in scary times, a companion into the unknown, a companion for us all. So may it be for Elise. like to invite Erica up to offer a remembrance.
Thank you, Reverend Sherry. That was beautiful, and thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate it. Bear with me, this might be difficult. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. How would I describe my mom? To use modern vernacular, she was a total baller. For those of you not familiar with the term, it's defined as anyone with a highly developed skill set plus a proficiency at the game of life. Call it style, panache, cool. That was my mom in a nutshell. Inspirational, brilliant, courageous, elegant, practical, unapologetic, and tough as nails. Mom taught me a lot of life lessons and inspired me to be ambitious, inquisitive, and confident, and to follow my own path. She instilled in me a love of animals, nature, science, and a wanderlust. Today, I want to share a few anecdotes that scratch the surface of what it was like having Elise Papp as my mother. One thing Mom wasn't was a doting, worried mother. One of my vivid childhood memories was playing with the neighborhood kids and flipping over on my bike in the driveway as we like to pop wheelies over the lip of our driveway. Of course, I had the wind knocked out of me, and I ran inside, and Mom was sitting at her desk. While hyperventilating, I told her I couldn't breathe. She very calmly looked down her nose over her reading glasses, as I'm doing right now, and said, "Erica, if you couldn't breathe, you wouldn't be speaking. Now go back outside and play." Well, I guess that's what you get for having a mom who's not only a physician, but a pathologist. I always thought it was so cool that my mom was a doctor. None of my friends' moms were doctors. From a young age, I recognized that was special, but I didn't know how special until I was a bit older. She was truly a trailblazer. I have no doubt that her career had some indirect bearing on my playing Little League baseball with all the boys. I was the only girl on the team. I didn't think too much of it, given my role model of a mother. In fact, I only learned last month that Mom had to petition to allow me to play a boys' sport. But petition she did, because why not? And guess what? I threw the ball just as well as all the boys, and no one could pitch to me because I'm a lefty. Mom didn't try to make her tomboy girly, nor did she try to make me right-handed. She let me be me. Mom always used to say, "Walk in the room like you own the place, and no one will question you." How many rooms do you think she walked in with a brave face on because she was doubted by a bunch of men? I still remember that quote today, and it totally works. Mom used to love to share her work with us. I fondly remember going to her office on a regular basis and seeing preserved specimens on the shelves. I would sit at the other side of her multi-headed microscope, and she would show me histopath slides. I would get dizzy between the smell of formaldehyde lingering in the air and the rate at which she would move the slides across the stage quite rapidly. But I thought it was pretty amazing. She would also make funny comments when serving dinner. Once when feeding us cauliflower, she said, "You know, this looks a lot like the human brain." She really did. No, not a typical mom. We always had a dog growing up, and I will never live without a dog. Currently, we have two, both rescues. Mom was a huge proponent of rescue dogs and all sorts of humane organizations that support animals. The Depapps have never been overly emotive with other humans, just ask our spouses, but man, do we love our dogs. That and our love of horses was a special bond I shared with her. Mom and I spent many years traveling the East Coast competing extensively. She rode a lot when I was very young, and then once I got more involved in competing, she was more my groom and driver, and of course my financier. In later years, she picked up riding again, and we even competed together. Then I got to be the one that was nervous when she was galloping cross country in her 50s. Yep, she was a badass. Although I have to say, at this point, 50s doesn't seem that old. Since I'm the youngest, I lived alone with Mom for 4 years after Ann and John left for college. We often butted heads during those teenage years. Most people were intimidated by her, but I'm too much like her, so I was a bit of a challenge. But for the most part, we got along well, and we spent many an evening eating dinner while watching Jeopardy, seeing who could get more correct answers. I was also lucky enough as an adult to travel extensively with Mom. We spanned 4 continents together, with some highlights including kayaking and whitewater rafting in Alaska, island hopping and snorkeling with sea lions in the Galapagos, getting lost driving from chateau to chateau in the Loire Valley and having to ask for directions in French, going on safari in Africa, including floating over the Serengeti in a hot air balloon, and fulfilling a lifelong dream of riding horseback across the verdant hills of Ireland. That last trip was when Mom was 78 years old, and she was dubbed the Galloping Grandma after we galloped along an Irish beach at full speed. I'm so lucky to have called this spectacular woman my mother, and I can only hope that I have made her proud. I will continue to do my best to carry on her legacy, and I can think of no better person in the next generation to help me do that than my niece and her namesake, Elise Dorian. I love you, Mom, and I miss you so much every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. John?
My mother didn't suffer fools gladly. Some might even say she lacked a filter. And she certainly was not one for sugarcoating. Like the time I broke up a dogfight and had to be driven to a nearby ambulance facility. To have several bite wounds on my arms and legs patched up. My mother simply said something to the effect of, "That wasn't very smart." Elise spoke truth and exhibited a fierce independence, said my childhood friend, Roy Douglas, retired Lieutenant Colonel, Army Special Forces. The thing is, she gave voice to the things that many of us think but don't have the guts to say. In 2005, in the Sweetbriar College class of 1955 50th reunion book, Mom wrote the following when asked, "How do you see your future? Wonder about where we're going with medicine. Are we going to keep everyone alive forever? Am a card-carrying member of Compassion and Choices, formerly the Hemlock Society. Think that we do with our old and very sick pets is far more humane than closeting them away in nursing homes. Also, have a problem with our society's demand for medical care as a God-given right, owed to us by the government, even though so many refuse to take care of themselves." And she continued, "The government doesn't guarantee everyone housing, food on the table, legal aid. I see too much greed, corruption, and immorality out there in the great wide world." While her classmates were talking about vacations and grandchildren, Mom was railing against social injustice. It's important to note that she was a single mother starting when I was 11 years old, in a time when many people did not talk openly about divorce, especially in a close-knit community. While raising 3 children and working full-time, she didn't skip a beat and tried to maintain continuity in our lives, partly by finding a way to get along with our father. And for that, I will always be grateful. Dad, thank you for being there for all of us and for sticking by Mom to the end. She may not have made it obvious, but I know she mostly appreciated your care. Since I am the only family member who did not grow up riding horses, I was given a lot of freedom overall. And this situation suited me quite well. As the only boy in a house of strong women and a middle child, I learned that early on that being a male didn't give me an advantage in an argument or any preferential treatment whatsoever. Until I became stronger, at which point I stopped getting beat up, at least. My sisters and I spent a week together before and after Mom's passing, going through her papers, and there were many. Diaries, work memos, random notebooks from her travels around the world. She was a prolific writer and kept a fascinating chronicle of her life in the same red diary her mother used. In a letter simply dated Christmas 2003, after moving out of our family house in Toby Estates, she signed off with the following: "As I look at the world around us, I see why I enjoy escaping from reality and going off with my horse for hours at a time. Enough said. Please change my address in your little book or computer and do right." I like to think that's where she is now, off with her horses and waiting for everyone's letters.
Thank you, John. And finally, the last of Elise's children, Anne.
Okay, good afternoon. Well, my siblings are not going to make this easy for me, and now I understand why my little sister asked to go first. So thank you all for allowing us to share our memories, and more importantly, thank you for being here to honor my mom. It's really important to us, and it means a lot to see so many familiar faces, some that go back, I'm afraid to say how many years. It's hard for me in a few minutes to distill my thoughts down to the remembrances I wish to share about my mom. As you've already heard, my mom was a pretty amazing woman. In many ways, she was ahead of her time, and as my siblings have acknowledged, she was a force to be reckoned with. The last 9 months were really difficult for my mom. She grew physically weaker, but her spirit and her will and her intellect were still there and reminded me every time of who she really was. Even my earliest memories of her were of a very strong, independent, and practical woman. She was always calm, yet very forceful in her opinions. She had an intellectual presence which I admired. Like my sister, I remember many times accompanying my mom to the pathology lab, and she taught me histology long before I entered medical school. I was fascinated by the glass jars in the lab that she would share with me, swirling them around like snow globes, but with human remnants inside, yes. The surgical specimens would be laid out in the sectioning table, and that smell of fixative also remains fresh in my mind. My mom definitely instilled in us a love for science at an early age. In middle school, my brother's pet iguana, Iggy, became my science fair project. Now, despite our best care and feeding, Iggy developed a progressive skeletal deforming disease, and when he died, my mom promptly consulted a veterinary pathologist and arranged for a postmortem exam. This confirmed a diagnosis of vitamin D deficiency rickets. So while most of my peers were growing bean plants for their science fair projects, Iggy's history, x-rays, and pathology report became the centerpiece of my winning science fair poster. In later years, I remember writing a very lengthy paper on ovarian teratomas, which is a rather unusual subject for a high school student. But
like anything I did, my mom reviewed it with a critical eye, always pushing me to think harder and choose my words carefully. When I published my first professional paper at the age of 26, she shared with me her first professional paper, published in the American Journal of Physiology in 1958, when she was only 25. My mom never failed to impress. Beyond science, my mom was very passionate about animals, as you've heard, especially dogs and horses. And she grew up with a varied assortment of pets, including a pet alligator that was hatched from an egg sent by a family friend who was visiting Florida. Now, this is in the late 1930s. My mom told me stories that her 4 older brothers would lift this giant creature because it grew, and they would threaten passerbys at their home in New Jersey, while she would watch in awe. The reptile grew so large that it actually hibernated in the compost heap in their backyard. I am not making up this story. And come spring, they ended up donating this alligator to the Bronx Zoo. So with the exception of an alligator, we grew up with a huge menagerie of pets, from gerbils, hamsters, rabbits, guinea pigs, turtles, lizards, snakes, dogs, an occasional cat, and of course, the horses. Now, rescuing animals in need was also fully encouraged by my mom, and we acquired 3 baby squirrels when they fell out of a nest and their mom had been killed. My mom taught us how to feed those baby squirrels. They were hairless, their eyes were still closed. We fed them with eyedroppers, and then we watched Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod grow into these darling but very destructive inhabitants of our back porch. We were allowed to keep them until they were old enough to be set free on a friend's farm. One of my favorite pet memories, though, was watching my mom deliver 7 puppies from our beagle Snoopy and assisting them in the basement stairwell where she had made a birthing center of sorts. We were able to keep those 7 puppies until they were old enough to find their own homes, and it was a wonderful experience. Now, I won't go into detail about the horses because I think many of you know how important they were to my mom, my sister, and I. And I'm very thankful to my mom for having introduced us to these wonderful animals and a wonderful sport. I will add that she really did try to interest my brother in riding, and she took us all on an amazing trip west through the Canadian Rockies and down to a ranch in Montana, where we did spend a week trail riding and camping under the stars. Horses remained a central part of my mom's life for over 80 years. And after she had her hip replacement in her mid-70s, I recall her convincing her orthopedic surgeon that she could still heal because her hip would be properly flexed when seated in a saddle, as long as she didn't fall off. In 2015, my mom, sister, and I accompanied my daughter Elise on a college tour in Virginia. And we were lucky enough to borrow 4 horses and ride off into the hills outside Charlottesville. Our host was not happy when she found out that my mom was over 80 at the time. My mom gave us so much. She loved us, and she inspired us. She taught us how to be strong, independent individuals and critical thinkers. Although she was not the nurturing type, as you've heard, she nurtured us in her own way. My mom was not excessive in her emotions, nor with her praise. So to my siblings, I just want to tell you this. She was so incredibly proud of both of you and all of your accomplishments, and she shared this with me many times over the past months before her death. Erica, you became the veterinarian that she always dreamed she would be, and she wrote about this in journals way back when she was a child herself. She was so proud of what you have become and what you achieved, and the amazing trips and experiences you shared with her. She was forever thankful. John, you were her rock and her movie star. And I know that because over these past 9 months, when her mind really started playing tricks on her, every time I would sit with her, she'd point at the TV or at the movie and say, "There's John. He's in the movies again." And that's how she saw you. You and Gabby did so much for her in these past years. I know she was incredibly grateful, and I want you to both to know that. And to my father, I also know that she appreciated your constant help, Dad, your assistance, your medical advice over many, many years, although she would never tell you that. That was Mom. And I love her, and I will miss her. And Mom, from all of us, we are so proud of everything you achieved in your lifetime and the role model you were for all the professional women who came after you. I'm afraid I didn't thank you often enough or tell you that I loved you, as those words didn't pass easily between us. But we love you, Mom, and we hope you are at peace. God bless you.
Thank you, Anne. I'd like to invite Elise's former husband, another Dr. DePapp.
Well, you know, after listening to them, this is a really tough act for me to follow. I should just sit down. But, you know, after a 66-year experience together, I thought I'd say a few words about our original contact in medical school. So what happened was that in sophomore year, the local newspaper, Democrat and Chronicle, wanted to take a picture of the class and to point out that, in fact, they were taking women. So I was in the front row because the alphabet was how they arranged the labs. So I was a D, and everybody else in that row were Ds. But Elise was a W. She's a Wachenfeld. And so they brought her all the way back to the front row to look like she was my lab partner, which sort of annoyed me because she wasn't my lab partner. So they took the picture, and it appeared in the DNC, and then my parents saw it. Now, who's this woman? I said, I don't know. I have never met her before, you know. And so it's interesting because, I mean, we got to be pretty good friends. As you heard, Elise's family was 4 older brothers, and I grew up with 3 sisters, a grandmother, and a mother. So we were both kind of used to the problems with the opposite gender. And Elise had amazing, you know, history. I don't know if you hear, but she actually rode in Madison Square Garden as a student, as a I guess, dressage. Is that what she did, dressage? Yeah, and, you know, I didn't know that at the time. But anyhow, in 2 years, we ended up getting married, believe it or not. And I was surprised she accepted my proposal because I only have 2 legs. But anyhow, we had a problem in medical school because, as you know, the doctors in the group, there's called a matching plan. And she took a year out in pathology, so we didn't graduate the same year. And so in 1959, I volunteered for the draft. Yeah, there was a draft there, including doctors too. If you volunteered, they gave you a better position, supposedly. And so my name came up. I was concerned because Elise was going to stay in Rochester for another year. But I put off my service for my internship. So I stayed as an R1, as an intern, and then I went into the service the following year when Elise was allowed to stay in Rochester. But anyway, it turned out that in spite of my best efforts, they said I would have to go to Tehran, Iran. Well, that's no place for women, especially women doctors. So fortunately, I had a general retired in the faculty, and he sent me down to Pentagon to plead for a better place of duty. And believe it or not, we got to be in Frankfurt, Germany, which is a heck of a lot better than. And the thing is that there, I was assigned to a multidisciplinary outpatient freestanding clinic. And Elise, having had a year of internship in pediatric, was able to work there. So for this 1 year, we sort of worked together, and that was kind of cool. And then, of course, I came after 2 years. Actually, speaking about Elise's strength, you know, while we were in Germany, Erica, not Erica, it was Anne who came along in 1962, I think. And we had to have a dog, so we actually got a dachshund before Anne was born, so we get used to taking care of, you know, infants. But the thing was that the military did not transport your family at that time. So Elise came back with an infant and a puppy dog in an airplane. I don't know how she managed that out, you know, because I don't know if she had 2 seats, one for the dog and one for herself in her lap, and she never complained. And I flew back, you know, a private military air transport. So then we spent a year in New Haven, and well, then John came along. So that was what, 1964, I believe. So again, Elise couldn't go back to work. And so I did my R3 year in Yale New Haven Hospital, and then we ended up back in Rochester. And at this time, the kids were old enough, so we were able to get a series of au pair Finnish girls who came in and help out, so Elise could finish her residency in pathology. And then we had another blessing when it was 68, I think, that Erica came along, and our family was complete. And you've heard the rest of it, and I'm not going to go into it. I think we all really appreciated living with her, and we'll miss her. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Dawn Reedy up.
Thank you for inviting me to speak. And this, again, you all are a hard act to follow, but I'll share some different reflections. I met Dr. Papp 38 years ago when I was a pathology resident rotating at the Genesee Hospital. Elise was my teacher across the microscope. She was an excellent diagnostician and educator, and I quickly realized I want to be like her. A few years later, in 1991, I was lucky enough to be invited to join Dr. Papp and her partners, Dr. Bruce Brown, Walter Markwich, and Ed Avila. My office was next to hers. Elise and company were a well-established group, trusted by their surgery and medicine colleagues. I was the new pathologist, and my diagnostic reports were understandably questioned. Elise stood up for me, and she helped me to quickly establish myself as an equally trustworthy diagnostician. Elise also taught me how to be a woman physician, how to stand up for myself and lead with my skills. Once, when I was dealing with a difficult resident, I started to cry. Elise signaled me into her office. "You can do that in here, but not out there." I've thought about that moment many times when my office was the safe place for other young physicians to vent their frustrations and regroup. I also witnessed Elise fearlessly challenge surgeons, fearlessly, always keeping the patient on the operating room table her highest priority, not the surgeon's ego. Elise was never afraid to speak her mind, always with her focus on the patient, and for that, I'm a better physician. Likewise, the generations of pathology, surgery, and OBGYN residents she helped train. Elise knew and cared about me and my family, my husband David, our 3 sons, and our dogs. Growing up, our young sons referred to Dr. DePapp as the doctor who drives microscopes for the Genesee Hospital. Though driving a microscope conjures a rather funny image, like someone driving a truck, they were actually describing her leadership as the driver of the multi-headed microscope where our group gathered each afternoon to discuss difficult cases. David and I do not have family in Rochester, so when our third son, Isaac, was born in 1997, we invited Elise to join us in the delivery room. After David, she was the second person to hold our minutes-old newborn. After Elise's retirement, as I moved from behind the microscope to progressively larger clinical leadership roles, Elise was a bit skeptical, wondering out loud, "Are you really happy doing this?" At the same time, she was clearly proud of my accomplishments. Whenever colleagues who knew Elise would tell me something that I did or said reminded them of her, I could not have been more honored and grateful. Elise was not afraid to stop by our house unannounced or call and summon us to hers if she needed help with her computer or it had simply been too long since our last visit. David and I enjoyed Elise's company. In early 2022, Elise was persistent in wanting a ride in David's new Tesla. We picked her up one evening, in the Tesla, of course, to drive to dinner at the Park Avenue pub. David did a bit of showing off, his car's acceleration and the self-driving feature. Elise was fascinated, asking lots of questions and impressed by the technology. Once we got in the restaurant, Elise fished her phone out of her purse and started texting someone, not paying any attention to either of us or to the menu. Finally, I asked, "Elise, what are you doing?" "I'm texting my grandson," she replied. "I need to tell him all about my first ride in a Tesla. I'll be with you shortly." Elise was admired and loved by her colleagues, both physicians and non-physicians alike, and we all have Elise stories. She was a strong and determined woman. She was also fiercely proud of her children and her grandchildren. Dr. DePapp was my teacher, my mentor, my most important professional role model, my colleague, and my friend. I will close my remarks with an email recently sent by Dr. Avila, her partner and mine, who now lives in Texas. Quote, "I will always remember Elise as a great mentor and colleague. The early years of my practice at Genesee were the best years of my life. Working with Bruce, Walter, and Elise allowed me to learn and grow. They were wonderful people to work with, and I will always remember them with love and admiration. I was fortunate and privileged to have had Elise for a colleague and will never forget her. May she rest in peace." End of quote. Thank you.
As our time comes to a close, I'd like to invite Elise's granddaughter, Elise, forward for our final reading.
I've selected 3 quotes from different women that remind me of my grandmother. The first quote is by a woman who needs no introduction, the notorious RBG. Whatever you choose to do, leave tracks. That means don't just do it for yourself. You will want to leave the world a little better for your having lived. The next quote is from another highly accomplished woman, the New York Times best-selling author J.T. Ellison. We all want to be remembered for something. We have children, we paint, we write, we fight, we conquer. We leave behind marks on the fabric of humanity. And while some of us are content to stay in the background, some of us want to make those marks as vivid and overwhelming as possible. We don't just want to be remembered, we want to be unforgettable. This last quote is by French author Simone de Beauvoir, best known for her trailblazing feminist philosophy. I am too intelligent, too demanding, and too resourceful for anyone to be able to take charge of me entirely. No one knows me or loves me completely. I have only myself. Grandmommy, it's an honor to be your namesake. Thank you.
In the spirit of prayer, I invite you to join me in this reflection. Spirit of life, God of many names and one abundant love, we commend to you the life of this absolute baller. Here in this universalist space, we believe that like dogs, all people go to heaven, and so this is a prayer for the living. As mere humans with only 2 legs, teach us to ride full tilt at life. Let us not hide away or sugarcoat the challenges and the wonders. Whether unexpected pregnancy and puppies, snow globes of surgical specimens, or a drop-in visit unannounced from someone who just wants a ride in your Tesla, may we make of surprises, of the ups and downs, something wonderful of this life. May we learn to say, I love you a little more easily. May we learn to live unapologetically as Elise did, to blaze trails less alone than we might have been because Elise de Papp has come through this life alongside us and before us. It is a hard act to follow, and yet we must. May we do so in love, in curiosity, and in courage. Our time together comes to an end here in this room, but I want to invite you all to stay, to gather over food and drink, to tell stories, and to know that this world was different because Elise lived in it. And it will be different because she is now gone from it in physical form. And yet we carry with us an eternal spark, the memories and the love and the difference that she made. Character survives, goodness lives, and love is immortal. May it be so.